Exhibit A, a Delta baggage claim with my name on it, but attached to a bag that was clearly not mine. And you can imagine my horror when arriving at Cedarville University a few months ago to address 3,700 students in chapel to discover that when I opened what I thought was my bag, the tags had been switched. It was my tag, but not on my bag. And indeed, the contents of that bag contained clothing that belonged, how do I put this delicately, to a member of the fairer sex who was at least 4 times my size. And I realized at that moment what Delta stands for. Don't expect luggage to arrive. You will, but your bags, that's another matter. And I had a decision to make that night at 10 o'clock when I discovered this switching of the tags. I could either drive to Walmart, which was 20 miles away, as fast as I could before they closed, to buy new clothes to wear that next day, or I could wear what was in that bag, which might have gotten me a job in the current administration in Washington, D.C., but would not be favorable to Cedarville universities. And I want to talk to you today about this topic. Who switched the tags? Pro-life, keeping the main thing the main thing. And here's why that matters to you. The very definition of what it means to be pro-life is up for grabs in our culture right now. In fact, the old definition, which was you oppose the intentional killing of an innocent human being, that's what makes you pro-life, has been switched. Just like someone had switched the tags on my bag, the definition of what it means to be pro-life has now been switched. Let me give you some examples. The most egregious example comes from a pastor, believe it or not, a guy who calls himself a pastor, I should say. His name is John Pavlovitz. And John Pavlovitz writes the following. He had titled this article, "My Dear White Conservative Pro-Life Friend." Now, right away you ought to be thinking, this isn't going to be a piece that's very nice to any of us who are opposed to abortion. Here's what Pavlovitz says. "I wish you were pro-life, my friend. I really do." By the way, if you think he sees you as a friend, I got land on the beach for you in Arizona. Going on. "I wish you really were pro-life, my friend. I really do. I wish all human beings mattered to you as much as Caucasian embryos do." Hey, we might as well just go ahead and do the race baiting right out of the gate, right? "I wish that when diverse children are thrust into the violent, difficult, painful world, many having to endure terrible disadvantages and obstacles and trials that you really will never experience, I wish that you actually gave more of a damn about them. Because if you did, life would be far bigger for you. You would want to do more than prevent abortion. In fact," now listen to him here, "as vigorously, passionately, and loudly as you oppose abortion, if you were truly pro-life, you would want to prevent hunger and poverty. You'd want to prevent illiteracy and child mortality and forced prostitution. You'd want to prevent racism and bigotry and homophobia. You'd want less guns in the street and schools and less guns in the home. You'd want kids in the bad neighborhood to have great schools and teachers just like your kids have them in the good neighborhood. You'd want to support single parents and the terminally ill and the mentally disabled by helping them carry their oversized burdens. You'd want those dreaming of coming to and contributing to this country to get to stay here. You'd want religious freedom even for people who aren't Christian. You would want gay and lesbian people to live and work and worship and love as they desire. You'd want people of color not to have to fear law enforcement and not to be disproportionately incarcerated. You'd want fewer guns in the hands of kids and criminals and those with mental illness. You'd want to prevent violence and workplace termination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. You'd want a living wage for all people who work hard and health care for their children that won't have to replace their daily meals. My dear white, Caucasian, conservative friend, I wish you really were pro-life. May I interpret for you what you just heard? If you oppose the intentional killing of an innocent human being in the womb, you are responsible to fix everything wrong with society. Oh, and by the way, it's not just our critics on the left, like John Pavlovitz, who say this. Sadly, some people on the pro-life side are also now saying it. And I want to quote a few of them who have bought the premise that because you oppose the intentional killing of an innocent human being, you have to fix everything wrong. You have to take on a million different issues, not just one. Herbie Newell has written a book on what it means to be pro-life. And by the way, well-intentioned fellow. No doubt about it, he loves Jesus, wants to care for those in need. He writes, quote, "Being pro-life means that not only do we see abortion as murder, but we also see our apathy against injustice toward life outside of the womb as a co-conspirator in the fight for life. It means we fight for racial equality. It means we love the woman walking into the abortion clinic passionately with the love of Christ. And it means we embrace life no matter what syndrome may be attached to a person's identity. There are many books written about being pro-life in combating abortion. But my hope is this small book will bring awareness that the pro-life ethic is so much bigger than just being pro-birth." Another pro-life leader who is doing very effective work in the area of pregnancy help ministry writes that, quote, "The pro-life movement must not only save children, but programmatically help others build strong families, have healthy marriages, be better parents, and have thriving faith lives. That, and of course, promote responsible fatherhood." Now, if that weren't bad enough, I was a keynote speaker at the 2017 Evangelicals for Life conference in Washington, D.C., where one of the keynote speakers there, Eugene Cho, a pastor, said the following to the pro-life advocates gathered at this evangelical pro-life conference. Eugene Cho told us that we all had to rewrite our job descriptions. He said the following: "We cannot just be anti-abortion. We should be for the sanctity of life from the womb to the tomb. Not just American lives, but Syrian lives. Not just Christian liberty religious lives, but Muslim refugee lives. We can't cherry pick. All life is sacred, and every single human being bears the image of God." Now, there is certainly nothing wrong with Christians having a broader ethic than merely dealing with abortion. There ought not be any debate about that. We can all agree that as Christians, we're going to want to engage a host of injustices. Not just abortion. As Christians, we should care about sex trafficking. We should care about the homeless. We should care about inner city poverty. And not just feel bad about it, we should act like we feel badly about it. That means we do something to address it, not just with our pocketbooks, but with our time and our energy and our priorities. There's no debate about that. And if these speakers were only talking about that, there wouldn't be a need for this talk today. In fact, I would be talking about something completely different. But make no mistake about what each of these speakers and writers is proposing. Their thesis is that the operational objectives of the pro-life movement must become broad and inclusive, not just your individual Christian ethic. They are saying that to be legitimate, the pro-life movement in its focus, in its professional operation, must take on all of these other issues, or it's an illegitimate movement. And men and women, I find that thesis appalling, I find it arrogant, and I find it absolutely dangerous to the future of this movement. And I am committed myself to opposing that thesis with everything that is within me. Because if these folks get their way and they switch the tags on what it means to be pro-life, our movement will lose, babies will die, and women will be wounded. We cannot allow this. And again, let me be clear about what I'm arguing. I am not arguing that as Christians we must focus only on one word, abortion. I am saying that while our Christian ethic is broad and inclusive, the operational objectives of the pro-life movement are necessarily narrow. And if somebody comes along and redefines what it means to be pro-life, our movement is finished. And to give you an idea of how crazy this is, I want you to just ask a question. It's one I raised a moment ago. How does it follow that because you oppose the intentional killing of an innocent human being, you are responsible to fix everything wrong with society? Can you imagine somebody going to the American Cancer Society and saying you have no right to call yourself a healthcare organization, especially a medical organization, when you only treat one disease and not all of them? I mean, hey, what are you doing about lupus? What are you doing about diabetes? What are you doing about heart disease? And what are you doing about strokes and Crohn's disease? I mean, would anybody go to the American Cancer Society and say that to them? Not in a billion years. Imagine going to Black Lives Matter and saying to their leadership, you don't really care about black lives because the only black lives you care about are those that are damaged by police brutality. Why, I don't see you doing anything about elementary age school kids who happen to be black and their educational goals are falling behind. All I see you doing is focusing on one thing, black lives as pertains to police brutality. Therefore, you're really not Black Lives Matter. You're just against police brutality. No one would say that to them. Or imagine this. Your church opens an inner city daycare center in downtown Chicago. And the idea behind this is that, hardworking moms in the inner city, often they are single moms. They are working 9-to-5 jobs. They've got kids then that come home from school. And before mom can even just catch her breath and get supper going, the kids are already making demands on her and she's already worn out from work. So here's what we're going to do as a church. We're going to open a daycare center that is open from 3 to 5 p.m. on weekdays only for elementary age school children, that during the 9 months of the school year, mom can catch her breath for a couple of hours, because what we'll do is we'll open this daycare center, the kids come right over after school, and while they're there, mom can get a head start on getting her evening programmed. Now, imagine if a church generously provided that. Imagine further, though, that the press showed up, shoved their mics in your pastor's face and said, well, you say you care about inner city kids, but do you? I mean, if so, why aren't you open 24/7? And how come you only care for elementary age kids? You do nothing for high school kids. And by the way, if you really cared about inner city poverty, shouldn't we see you opposing gang violence with the same intensity, the same fervor, and the same commitment that you do opposing hunger for elementary age kids? And oh, by the way, if you really love children, what are you doing about gun violence in the inner city? I mean, can you imagine the audacity of somebody coming to your pastor after your church graciously opened this daycare center and said, you're not doing enough? Men and women, that's precisely what you're being told because you're pro-life. And you should not buy it. This is not a biblical critique of the pro-life movement. I believe it's a lie designed to knock us off message, to keep us from keeping the main thing, so that our side eventually loses. And what has happened, just to put it bluntly, is the word pro-life has been twisted not to mean protection for life in the womb, but quality of life for those outside of it. And as a result, the very definition of what it means to be pro-life is now up for grabs. And I want to take a few moments in the time that I have with you to talk about what our objectives should be as pro-life Christians who are biblically grounded in the gospel. What does it mean to be pro-life? Because that definition of pro-life that I just gave you is so overwhelming that not even Superman could live up to it. I mean, think about it for a moment. If you're going to be pro-life, you have to take on all those other issues. I mean, what does that mean in the real world? For example, just take my job description. I speak in Catholic and Protestant high schools. I do a lot of speaking on campus. Does that mean then that every time I go give a pro-life talk, I get to spend 5 minutes on abortion, but then I got to spend 5 minutes on hunger, and another 5 minutes on poverty, another 5 minutes on refugees, another 5 minutes on immigration policy? I mean, this is absurd, and it's a backbreaking job description none of us can fulfill. I think there's a better biblical model. One that does not exhaust us, though we will certainly pay a price fulfilling it. Not one that breaks our spirits and overwhelms us with despair because we feel like, how on earth could I ever live up to this? Rather, I'd rather point us to 4 things all of us can do. Whether you're a professional pro-life advocate working in a crisis pregnancy center, or you're a pro-life speaker, or you're a lay pro-life advocate who says, I want to honor Christ in all that I do in my pro-life work. I want to honor Jesus. I want to be part of His kingdom in what I do, and I want my work to bring Him glory in a way that promotes the gospel, sees babies saved, and sees lives restored in the only way they ever can be restored, through the proclamation of the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. So what are the 4 things? Instead of taking on every issue under the sun, What are the 4 things we need to do as pro-life Christians? And here they are. Number 1, we need to advocate for the unborn legally. And I'll explain what that looks like in just a moment. Secondly, we need to engage the culture with a persuasive pro-life apologetic. And that means, men and women, not just me, the guy that does this for a living, but you as well. All of us have to do this. We are all apologists now. Third thing we need to do, we need to present alternatives to abortion by partnering with our local crisis pregnancy centers. And finally, this is key, we have got to minister to millions of our fellow Christians who have written themselves off from having any effective ministry impact because of past sexual sin that often includes abortion. Those are the 4 things we do to be pro-life Christians who are grounded in Scripture and who love the gospel of Jesus. Let's look at that first thing. We need to advocate for the unborn legally for this reason: to limit the evil of abortion insofar as we can, given the situation we are called to work in. We limit the evil insofar as we can to limit the evil done. Let me define for you what it means for the pro-life side to win this fight, because there tends to be a lot of confusion about this. What does it mean to say pro-lifers have won the fight over abortion? It's a real easy definition of victory. Here it is. All unborn children are protected in law. All unborn children are protected in law. Men and women, please hear me. Until that happens, we have not won. I know a lot of people say, well, what we ought to do is just work to reduce the need for abortion. A society that reduced racism, but still left it legal for you to segregate against people whose skin color you don't like, would still be a deeply immoral society. A society that reduced spousal abuse, but still left it legal for you to beat your wife, would remain a deeply immoral society. Victory is one thing: legal protection for unborn human beings. And it's a sad thing to behold, but there are a lot of Christians who really oppose that. They almost view the law as the enemy, and they misunderstand the clear teaching of Scripture. God gave us 2 ways to restrain evil in the culture. Not one way, 2 ways. The first way is through people coming to Christ through gospel proclamation. They hear the gospel and they steadfastly are committed to it, and over time you see their hearts change. The old saying that Jesus first catches his fish, then cleans them, is absolutely true. None of us come to Christ with our worldview all of a sudden set in order. Our justification before God is immediate. The one-time declaration of God the Father that we are declared righteous and no longer guilty because Jesus stood in our place condemned and lived the perfect life of obedience none of us have lived. And God the Father, in virtue of what Jesus did, declares us not guilty. That's justification. Sanctification is, over time, we become more Christ-like. So, of course, we're not saying that new believers immediately understand a pro-life ethic. They may not. In fact, they may not even know it as well as some unbelievers do. We'll get to that in a moment. But here's the thing. When we talk about the way God restrains evil in the culture, the first way is through people coming to Christ. Their hearts are changed, their worldview commitments change, their priorities change. But what about those who never come to Christ? In fact, biblically, I can make a very good case that that's going to be the vast majority of people in human history. They will not be regenerate. They will not come to Christ. How do we then restrain evil with those folks? And here's the second way God gave us to do that. Civil law. Government. Government's job is not necessarily to change hearts the way the gospel does. Government's job is to restrain the heartless. Dr. Martin Luther King was once asked at Western Michigan University in 1962. He said, "Dr. King," the critics said, "Dr. King, you can't make the white man love you. You've got to change hearts." Dr. King said the following, "It is true, the law cannot make the white man love me, but it can stop him from lynching me, and that matters." In other words, the purpose of the law is not to create a new heart, though I would argue that the law does function many times as a moral teacher, but that's not its primary purpose. It's to restrain the heartless. Conversion changes hearts. Civil law restrains the heartless, and God has given us both ways as a means of restraining evil in the culture. And as Christians, sometimes I think what we do is we limit God. We say God's only going to do it through the proclamation of the gospel. That's it. Other than that, we can't end abortion. Was slavery ended through mass religious revival? Was racial segregation ended through massive religious revival? It is entirely possible that God will see fit to end abortion outside of revival. He may use that method, but for us to say that's the only method is mistaken. Now, of course, none of this means we shouldn't be preaching the gospel. Of course we should be. But let's not limit God. Remember our objective here. We want to win by legally protecting all unborn humans. Another obstacle to this, and a lot of Christians sadly have bought into this, they have relativized abortion as if it's a mere preference issue like choosing chocolate ice cream over vanilla. And their arguments go something like this, and maybe you have friends in your churches who have said this very thing. I personally oppose abortion. Fill in what's the word you know is coming next. But I think it should remain legal because I don't think it's my place to impose my morality on someone who disagrees. Anyone who tells you that does not understand the nature of abortion or the nature of moral reasoning. Imagine me saying to you, I personally oppose spousal abuse, but if you want to rough up your wife in the privacy of the bedroom, that's no concern of mine, and we certainly shouldn't make it illegal. Or I personally oppose slavery, but if you want to own a slave, that's not my place to judge you, and neither should the government. Nobody would argue that way. Why do they argue that way with abortion? Because men and women, they have reduced abortion to a mere preference issue like choosing chocolate over vanilla. It is now a matter of likes and dislikes. You've seen that bumper sticker, haven't you? It goes like this: don't like abortion? ? Well, don't have one. That's exactly the mindset that has crept into the church. When I hear believers say, I don't want to get political, I certainly don't want to make abortion illegal, I just want to reduce it. That is not a biblical worldview. Not at all. If I were a slave on a slave ship outside of New York Harbor in 1850, and I was getting ready to get shipped south to Savannah, I would be praying very hard if I were a Christian slave that my brothers and sisters in Christ would mobilize politically to do something about my condition. And if you were on that ship, you would be doing the same thing. Now, I've heard the objections. People say, well, abortion is just one of many issues. And as my colleague John Enzer likes to point out, people who make this claim do not understand the nature of evil. Not all sins are the same. It is true that all sin separates us from God. It is true that it doesn't matter whether it's stealing a pencil or shooting somebody in the back. Any of that will alienate you from God. That is true. But just because we all share equally a sinful nature from which sinful acts spring, doesn't mean that the acts that spring from that sinful nature are morally equivalent. There is a difference between stealing a pencil and dismembering a living human being in the womb. And what tends to happen in a lot of Christian thinking is people put all these issues together in one big moral stew, and then they say, well, abortion's just one of many issues, so if I vote for a party that promotes abortion wholesale, but they're good on all these other issues, I'm all right, because if they're good on other, quote, pro-life issues and only wrong on abortion, I guess the best I can do is go with those that are going to do the greatest good given all these other issues being equivalent. But here's the problem. They are failing to distinguish between contingent evils and intrinsic evils. Now that may sound very academic to some of you. You might be sitting here thinking, now, wait a minute, this is a webcast. I really don't want to get too philosophical. I mean, didn't you call this, after all, a rally? Well, what I hope to do here is rally your thinking and help you see through a lot of the distortions that are out there. In the last presidential election, we heard again and again from groups like Evangelicals for Biden, pro-life evangelicals for Biden, that abortion was just one of many issues. And we shouldn't get so focused on abortion that we ignore all these other issues. But here's the thing. Abortion is an intrinsic evil. And here's what I mean by that. An intrinsic evil is an evil that is wrong on the face of it. It is by definition evil. It can never be right. Rape, for example. Murder, for example. Abortion, for example. These are intrinsic evils. They are in a different class altogether than contingent ones, which I'll explain in just a moment. Intrinsic evils must always be opposed. Always. There is no room to make accommodation for them, ever. A contingent evil is different. A contingent evil says the following. War, it may be wrong, but it depends on the circumstances. In other words, you can't just say all wars are evil. There could, in fact, be a just war. In fact, I would argue there might be times when it would be wrong not to engage in war. For example, as a government, you have a responsibility to protect your citizens. If a foreign nation is attacking your citizens unjustly, you have a duty to defend your citizens, even if that means war, as we have seen in our own nation's history at times. A contingent evil might be capital punishment. Capital punishment might be evil, especially if we've wrongly convicted somebody, but it is not always so. But here's what's happened in our culture. Secular thinking, sadly, has crept into the church. Because now what we have happening is people who ought to know better are treating intrinsic evils as if they are merely contingent ones. And the two are in completely different categories. You cannot justify an intrinsic evil by stringing together a whole bunch of contingent evils that you have somehow overcome, and now you say, because we've overcome these contingent evils, we can tolerate the intrinsic one. No, you can't. Good deeds do not atone for bad ones. And this is a confusing point for so many Christians today. Second thing we need to do as pro-life Christians is engage the culture with a persuasive case for life, focused on the humanity of the unborn and the inhumanity of abortion. I'm going to give you right now what the formal pro-life case looks like. And you'll be able to memorize this by simply hearing this. And if any of you want notes on what I'm saying, in fact, some of you may have already been taking notes faster than broke people at a Dave Ramsey seminar. And if that's you, I want you to know that we are going to make notes available to you. For those of you watching this, there'll be a website where you can pick up a link to the notes of my presentation, and I think for others as well, and you can follow up on these points that we're making. But here's the key thing. The pro-life case can be formally presented. We actually present an argument. We don't just say it's our opinion abortion is wrong. We make a case for it. Now, here's the thing about arguments. Just because we make a case for our view, which I'll go over in just a moment, it does not follow that our argument is infallible. You can show that an argument goes wrong a couple of different ways. First, you can show that the conclusion does not follow logically from the premises. That's called the validity test. Or you can show that one or more of the premises is false. That's the soundness test. But outside of that, the argument stands. If the premises are true, the conclusion follows, the argument is a good one, and you are obliged to submit to it intellectually. Well, what is the pro-life syllogism? What is the pro-life argument? Here it is. Premise 1, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise 2, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Conclusion? Therefore, abortion is wrong. It's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Abortion does that. Therefore, it's wrong. Now, again, notice that I've laid out a case. If you want to show it's mistaken, you got to show that the argument is unsound or that it's not valid. It's not going to do to simply dismiss it as a religious argument, like so many people you know love to do. Well, that's just your religious view. Time out. That is not going to fly. As my friend Francis J. Beckwith points out, he's a philosophy professor at Baylor University, arguments are sound or unsound, valid or invalid. Calling an argument religious is a category error, like asking how tall is the number 5. You've only dismissed the argument. You haven't done the hard work of refuting it. Now, pro-lifers defend that syllogism with science and philosophy. We argue from science that from the earliest stages of development, from the one-cell stage, you were a distinct, living, and whole human being. I want you to hold your hand up right now, and I want you to give yourself a good pinch on the back of your hand. Go ahead, just give yourself a really good pinch. Congratulations. You've just sent a couple of hundred somatic cells hurling to their death on the keyboard in front of you. Every one of those cells that you just sent hurling contains your entire DNA encoding. Did you just commit mass murder? Well, of course, the answer is no. And you know why. These cells on the back of your hand are merely part of a larger human being, you. They are not distinct whole human beings the way you were when you were an embryo, the way I was when I was an embryo. There's a difference in kind between each of our bodily cells and the embryonic human beings we once were. That's the science of embryology. Why is this tough for some people to get? I mean, it seems pretty straightforward. Well, most of us, if we're honest, if we've ever seen a picture of an early embryo, which is only viewable under a microscope, we probably didn't think to ourselves, well, look at that cute little baby. Isn't she cute like my cousin Abigail? No, that's not what we thought, because if you look at that early embryo, it looks like just a ball of cells. And I think our intuitions immediately think, well, that just doesn't look like a baby. And you're right, it doesn't look like a baby. And here's why. It's not a baby, but it is a human being at the earliest stages of development. And sometimes our intuitions are mistaken on first glance. And let me give you an example that might help. To borrow an illustration from philosopher Richard Stith, I want you to pretend that you have a Polaroid camera. Now, for any listening to me right now or watching me who are under the age of 40, you need to understand that there was a time when we did not take pictures with our phones. We had these devices called cameras, and cameras were these rectangular little devices made out of hard plastic or hard rubber, and they had a lens that would open up and let light through the shutter that would then record the image of what you were photographing on this stuff called film. Now, film was expensive. We certainly did not waste it taking pictures of our food. By the way, any of you watching, if you are friends with me on social media and you ever post a picture and you're a guy and you post a picture of your food, if you're a guy, you've just lost your man card with me. I defriend you. But film was expensive. And the way it would work is you'd shoot 36 pictures, and after you shot 36 pictures, very carefully you would remove the film from the camera. You would place it in this little plastic canister, and you would drive to the far corner of the neighborhood supermarket where there was a little shed called Photomat. You would drop your pictures off. You would wait a month and a half for them to come back, half of them overexposed. That's how it worked back in the dark days. Now, of course, everything is digital. But back in the late 1950s, early 1960s, the Polaroid-style cameras that many of you are familiar with today made their first appearance. And of course, the beauty of the Polaroid was you didn't have to wait a month and a half to get your pictures back. You shot your picture, it would spit out a piece of paper, you'd pull it out and shake it, and 2 minutes later, the image would emerge right in front of your eyes. I want you to pretend, again, to borrow this example from Richard Stith, that you have traveled back in time to 1970. You are on a Mexican safari. You just happened to catch with your Polaroid camera an image of a black jaguar leaping across the trail in front of us. And you are absolutely breathless with excitement because you know that black jaguars are almost never filmed in the wild, but you nailed it. You not only got the jaguar, you got him midair. And while you're waiting for your picture to emerge, I come up behind you and I rip the camera out of your hand, I yank the paper out of it, and I tear it up. Are you angry at me? Yeah, you're furious. You'll kill me even if you are pro-life, right? What if I glibly replied, hey man, come on, what's the big deal? I didn't see a jaguar in that picture. All I saw was a white paper with a brown smudge on it. Would that satisfy you? No chance. You'd look at me with eyes on fire and you'd say, are you out of your mind? The jaguar in the picture was already there. We just couldn't see him yet because he was still developing. Men and women from the one-cell stage, you were already there. We just couldn't see you yet because you were still developing. That's the science of embryology. From the earliest stages, from the one-cell stage, you were a distinct, living, and whole human being. That's the uncontested science of embryology. But pro-lifers also argue philosophically. We argue that there's no essential difference between you, that embryo at the one-cell stage, and you, the adult today, that would justify killing you back then. Oh, there are differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, but that's not what matters here. And by the way, I'm going to preach for a moment. Christians, hear me. We too often assume the burden of proof when it's not ours to assume. The other guy's making the claim. For example, if I claim that right now swinging above your head on a rope is a pink elephant, those of you that just looked up, by the way, in the privacy of your homes, you did the right thing. If I make that claim, who bears the burden of proof? You or me? Well, I do. I made the claim. I bear the burden of proof. If somebody comes to you and says, that embryo doesn't count because he's different from us, they made the claim, they bear the burden of proof, you should not immediately submit to the claim. People will point out all kinds of differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, but they've got to argue for why those differences matter in the first place. It's not enough to merely point out a difference. Now, there are differences. There's a difference of size. There's a difference of level of development. There's a difference of environment, meaning where we're located, and a difference of degree of dependency. You can think of the acronym SLED, as Stephen Schwartz has asked us to do, to remember these four differences. Not one of them matters such that we can say it was okay to kill you then as an embryo, but not now as a young adult or adult. Size, there's your S in that acronym. You were smaller as an embryo. You know what your answer should be when critics bring this up? So? Why does that matter? I mean, really, as a matter of principle, do we really want to say that big people get to pick on little people? Really? I mean, seriously, if it's wrong to hurt people because of skin color and gender, why is it okay to hurt them because of their body size? Men are generally larger than women. Do men deserve more rights than women do simply because they tend to be larger? What about your level of development? You were less developed as an embryo. So, why does that matter? You see, it's not enough to point out the difference. Why does my development determine whether I get butchered or not? 2-year-old girls are less developed than 21-year-old young women. 2-year-old girls do not have a developed reproductive system yet. Are they less human and valuable than the 21-year-old who does? Next week, I will be speaking at a very large Catholic high school, and I will be speaking to 1,700 students in an assembly. And as I do often at these types of events, I will say to the students, you are less developed than your parents. You're less developed than your parents physically, and you're less developed than your parents intellectually, which will come as a complete shock to all of them. But you don't reach your intellectual peak in terms of mental development until your mid-40s. Does it follow your parents have a greater right to life than you simply because they're more developed than you are? And as you can imagine, the students will shoot that one down very quickly. Size, level of development. What about your environment where you're located? You're in the womb, now you're out. But how does where you are determine what you are? I'm going to guess that most of you watching this presentation right now traveled at least 70 feet to do it. You may have walked from a kitchen to a study or from a bedroom to a family room, I don't know. But if a journey of 70 feet did not change you from one kind of thing to another, how does a journey of 7 inches down the birth canal suddenly transform you from non-human, non-valuable thing we can kill to valuable human being that we cannot? Answer, if you weren't already human and valuable, you don't get there just by changing your address. And finally, degree of dependency. Size, level of development, environments. We've got SLE, our D is degree of dependency. Sure, you depended on your mother for survival. So, how does dependency on another human being mean that we can intentionally dismember you? I'm sure many of you have seen the picture of the Henschel twins, Abigail and Brittany. These young women are now in their early 30s, but the press has followed them since infancy. And here's why. They are conjoined twins. If you look at the picture of these two twins, you'll see one set of legs, and then from the waist up, they branch into two shoulders, two heads, and yet there they are. It's two girls, not one girl. And yet, if dependency on another human being means we can intentionally kill you, neither one of those girls has a right to life because neither can live without the other. They share vital organs and cannot be separated. Size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency, think SLED. Not one of those 4 differences is a good reason for saying we could kill you as an embryo, but not now. Now someone might be thinking, okay, that sounds great. That sounds like good logic, but what about the Bible? Let's see what the Bible says. Okay, I'm glad you thought of that, because pro-lifers do have a biblical case as well. And I might surprise you that I'm not going to go to Psalm 139. I'm not going to go to Jeremiah 1:5. I'm not going to go to Job 3:3, or any of the passages traditionally used by Christians to argue for the pro-life view. I'm not saying those passages aren't good passages, but I'm going to go a different way. I want to give you a way to go with the skeptic who says to you, the word abortion never appears in the Bible, and nowhere does the Bible expressly teach that the unborn are human. There's no command against abortion, and nowhere does the Bible expressly say fetus is a human being. I'm going to grant both those premises. Not because I believe Scripture is silent on them necessarily, but because I want to grant the premise to show you that you can still make a very powerful pro-life argument from the Bible and even grant those 2 premises. Okay, here's how it goes. When someone says to you that the Bible nowhere condemns abortion, the first question you need to put to them is this: are you suggesting that whatever the Bible does not expressly condemn, it condones? Are you saying that whatever the Bible does not adamantly forbid, it allows? Now, when your critic says no, as they must, your response should be then, help me understand then your point. This is a vacuous argument. The Bible nowhere says, thou shalt not use neighbor for shark bait. Does that mean we can do it? Arguments from silence are inherently fallacious. But let me take you now to making a positive case. By positive, I mean a logically forceful argument that the Bible is pro-life. Here it is. Premise 1. Scripture teaches that all humans have value because they bear the image of God. Genesis 1 teaches this in the Old Covenant. James 3 teaches it in the New. Both Testaments speak to this. Premise 2. Because humans bear the image of God, the shedding of innocent blood, by which we mean the intentional killing of an innocent human being, is strictly forbidden. Exodus 23:7 teaches this. Proverbs 6:16-19 teaches this. Matthew 5:21 teaches this. Okay, let's stop right there. Let's take just those first 2 premises. All humans have value because they bear the image of God. And because they bear the image of God, the shedding of innocent blood is strictly forbidden. What's the only question left we need to ask? Are the unborn human? Because if they are, The same scriptures that forbid the shedding of innocent blood apply to the unborn as they do everybody else. And we know, as we've already seen from the science of embryology, the unborn are distinct, living, and whole human beings. Therefore, they too are image bearers. Therefore, it's wrong to shed their blood intentionally. Therefore, the Bible is pro-life. That's as clear as can be. There's just no debate about it. Someone might say, well, I'm still not satisfied. I need the Bible to expressly say the unborn are human before I'll accept they are. Question for you. Does the Bible teach that Americans are human? Does it teach that Canadians are human? Does it teach that the French are human? Some of you are going, wait a minute, on that one we may need to negotiate. It doesn't. It says rather that all humans have value because they bear the image of their Maker. If the unborn are members of the human family, they too bear the image of their Maker. Now, I want to sum up this point by giving you a huge take-home. This is a gift. Suppose you have 1 minute to defend your pro-life view with either a non-Christian or maybe someone at your church who doesn't hold to the pro-life view. How can you make your defense in a minute or less? Here it is, and you can time me if you want. We'll get this done in under a minute. I will tell you that at age 61, I'm slow on the basketball court, though I still play. I know it's suicidal, it's crazy, but I haven't convinced myself yet that I'm too old to be doing that kind of thing. But I'm going to get this done in under a minute. This I will be quick at. Let's say your Aunt Betty visits you at Thanksgiving coming up, and she's not a believer. She's from Boston. She holds a worldview very different than your own. And between bites of turkey and stuffing, she finally looks at you and says, now, why are you pro-life? Here's what you're going to tell her, and you're going to get this done in a minute or less. You're going to look at her and say, start the clock. Aunt Betty, I'm pro-life because it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. And the science of embryology says that from the earliest stages of development, you were a distinct, living, and whole human being. You weren't part of another human being like skin cells on the back of my hand. You were already a whole living member of the human family, even though you had yet to grow and develop. And you know what else, Aunt Betty? There's no essential difference between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, that would justify killing you back then. Differences of size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency are not good reasons for saying we could kill you then, but not now. Now, obviously, I don't have a watch up here, but I promise you I got that done under a minute. How many Bible verses did I cite? None. But did I communicate biblical truth? Yes, I did. And that's our job, men and women. That's our job. All right, last two things, and we're going to wrap up. Third thing we need to do to keep the main thing and not be distracted is present alternatives to abortion through the important work of our local pro-life pregnancy resource centers, or crisis pregnancy centers, as some of them are known as. We as Christians can answer a guy like John Pavlovitz who says we don't give a rip about any children born, only those in the womb. We can answer him logically the way we've already done. We can answer him biblically and theologically the way we've already done, but we can also answer him practically. He is simply lying when he says we don't care. Yes, we do. Now, can we care more? Of course, always. But he's making the argument we don't give a damn. Yes, we do. Pro-life pregnancy centers now outnumber abortion clinics 2-to-1 in this country. Those pregnancy centers, staffed by volunteers largely, give the shirts off their backs to help that woman and her child. Not just before birth, but after. And by the way, as you pray for those centers, which I hope you do, not only do you hopefully support them financially, but when you pray for them, do this. They're not just giving away free social services. You know what's happening in that counseling room as that client is engaging the staff? You know what's happening? Nothing short of spiritual warfare. Not in the weird sense that some people take it, but in the way I think the Bible describes it in 2 Corinthians 10, as taking captive ideas that exalt themselves against the knowledge of God. As that client is interacting with that pregnancy center staff person, if the client's worldview, through the power of the Holy Spirit and through the faithful witness of that pregnancy center staffer, changes to where she sees truth as being real and objective, and it's her job to get in line with it, her child's going to live. Also, if she comes to view human life as being intrinsically valuable because it bears the image of its maker, her child's going to live. As you pray for your local pregnancy center, don't just pray that the staff will be good at giving away stuff that the client needs. And by the way, all the centers do a terrific job loving their neighbor by doing that. But also pray that that idea struggle, which is the same idea struggle you encounter with the people you know, the battle over truth and the battle over human value, pray that that idea struggle is won decisively through the power of the Holy Spirit by that pregnancy center staff. They are engaged in spiritual warfare at the highest level, and they need our support, and they need our financial support. It's not enough to merely feel bad about abortion. We need to act like we feel bad by doing something about it, and our pregnancy centers are the place to do it. My final point, we keep the main thing by ministering to millions of post-abortion men and women who've written themselves off from ever being used of God because of sexual sin in their past. Dear brother or sister, if you're watching this right now, I'm going to take a minute and I'm just going to talk to you. Everybody else, forgive me. If that's you, please hear me. You do not need an excuse. You need an exchange. Christ's righteousness for your sinfulness. And the reason you have good standing before the judge of this universe to proclaim pro-life truth has nothing to do with the merits of your own life, any more than my authority to do so has something to do with the merits of my life. I am not pro-life to earn God's favor. I am pro-life because I have God's favor. Because God the Father no longer looks at me as a sinful rebel. The moment my trust was in Jesus, I am now adopted into God's family as a dearly loved child, and God looks at Jesus, and the righteousness that is found in Christ is attributed to me. I'm not made righteous, but I'm declared righteous because of what Jesus did in my place. And if this is you, if you've had an abortion, or maybe you're a man, you encouraged a woman to have an abortion, and somehow you got tuned into this today and you're thinking, my goodness, I've sure heard a lot. Take this home. In fact, take it to the bank. What makes you right with God and gives you the right to convey His ministry on the issue of abortion has everything to do with what Jesus already did for you and nothing to do with your own righteousness or merit. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ. And all of us today, all of us, approach pro-life work never being able to live up to the demands of what God would require of us. None of us do this work perfectly. But by the same token, neither should we take on a job description that is not the Lord's job description for us, that is not something we can do. And men and women, I am afraid that if we step away from keeping the main thing, if we step away from being essential pro-life advocates who convey a legal defense for the pro-life view, we convey a persuasive apologetic for the pro-life view. We also support and stand with our pregnancy centers in our communities, and we minister to those wounded by abortion. If we step outside and take on way more than those objectives, by the way, did you notice that every single one of those 4 objectives deals with one subject, abortion? As Christians, we'll take on a lot of issues. As Christians, we will support and minister to people facing all kinds of injustice, but do not place on the pro-life movement the operational demand that they take on everything wrong with society. Most pro-life groups are flat broke, and we now are going to force them to spread their scarce resources even thinner, fighting every injustice under the sun. May it never be. Let us always be Christians with charitable hearts, big hearts willing to take on and love people, love our neighbors, no matter what they're facing. But when it comes to the operational goals of the pro-life movement, let us never forget it's not wrong to be singular. In fact, it would be wrong not to be. Let's keep the main thing the main thing.
The U.S. accounts for only 3% of the abortions that happen in our world each year, leaving 97% of the crisis before us as a world missions challenge. Would you join us in serving where the need is greatest? Passion Life, rescuing the most vulnerable where abortion is most concentrated.
Closed countries and unreached people groups are the final frontier of global missions. 1/3 of humanity have still never heard the name of Jesus. 42% of the world's population live in closed countries with little or no gospel witness. And for every 30 missionaries that go to the reached, roughly 1 missionary goes to unreached people groups.
God's heart breaks for the nations. He longs to redeem a people from every tribe and nation on the earth. We believe God is calling a generation to go to closed countries and to unreached peoples. We've started the Open Initiative to help them get there. Find out how you can help open a closed country at abwe.org.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for that session. That was a blessing and a conviction, I think, for a lot of us. Thank you for what you do day in and day out with LTI. You're a blessing to the pro-life world, and I've been blessed over the years listening to you, following you, not in a stalker way, but I've been blessed.
Sure, I'll bet, yeah.
One of the things you did early on was define some terms that I thought was helpful. And actually you dripped that later on as well, but especially, okay, you have a phrase being pro-life, or I'm pro-life, and you talked about how that's kind of being twisted that's a great example of the meaning of words mattering in this case.
Yes. Yeah, because what's happening is the very term pro-life is being changed before our eyes. And as I said in the presentation, the danger of that is we drift, we lose focus of what we're really about. There are pro-life ministries now that I encounter that are doing almost nothing on abortion. They think it's enough to just be a social relief organization. And they're missing the focus of what it means to be pro-life. Pro-life historically has always meant you oppose abortion. Now here's what's interesting. Nobody says to, quote, pro-choice, unquote, groups, well, you're not really pro-choice because you're not pro-school choice, you're not pro-tax choice. Nobody says that to them. You're not pro-vaccination choice. They only go after pro-lifers for not being pro-life because we don't take on every life issue under the sun. And that's unfair. That's poisoning the well. We should let people define their own terms according to their own principles instead of forcing a definition on them that they would never accept.
Yeah, and you talked, not only is it unfair, but it's a distraction and a burden that that pro-life organizations shouldn't have to bear.
Yeah.
No one else is, like you said, they're not bearing that burden. They're not.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of a sex trafficking organization, not one that does it, but one that is opposing it, being told, well, you're really not for human life because you're not doing anything on abortion? Nobody would go to them and make the demands that people make on pro-lifers to take on all these other issues. And it's sad because I've even heard clergy and leaders who ought to know better make these kinds of claims.
Why are these claims being made, and why are we responding the way we are to them, like they're an actual claim to respond to?
Right. A lot of it, I think, Adrian, comes back to people wanting to be liked. They think that our biggest problem in the world is that pro-lifers are not liked. They think that our primary problem is a PR problem, not a worldview problem. No, our primary problem is worldview, not PR. And here's how I can prove it. Let's suppose pro-lifers did everything our critics are demanding of us. We took on care for the environment. We took on poverty. We bankrupted ourselves taking care of refugees. We spent our last dime on immigration reform. I mean, we took on every issue that they throw at us. Would the critics that are demanding this of us suddenly oppose abortion?
No.
No, not at all. It's one big smokescreen. And I refuse to buy it. And instead of challenging the premise by saying, wait a minute, back up here, how does it follow that because I oppose the intentional killing of an innocent human being, I have to take on all these other issues? They say, well, we really do care. Why, look at what we're doing. And it will never be enough for our critics. If we put a pro-life crisis pregnancy center on every street corner in America, offering free services to women, first of all, the vast majority of abortion-minded women will blow right by us anyway and go to Planned Parenthood because they know full well that we're offering 18 years of hardship while Planned Parenthood is offering 18-minute quick fix. In 18 minutes, Planned Parenthood can fix that girl's immediate problem. We don't win the PR war. We don't win the sales pitch war. We got to dig in and fight a worldview war, and I think a lot of people don't have the stomach for that. And so they right away start apologizing to the culture and saying, well, we are caring. Why, look, we'll adapt. We'll show you that we really care. And I get it, but you don't make peace with people who are never going to be your friends. It doesn't work.
Yep. Well, another term you defined was the term abortion. What is abortion? I think that is so crucial too, and over the years I've heard you define it and make a point to define it. And it can clear up some things as well. I'm thinking of like the issues of the life of the mother being a justification for abortion, and that seems to get people tied in knots, but like you did, defining abortion can clear up things. So again, I mean, you're defining things and it's clearing up. When abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human being, now when we perform a life-saving surgery and our unintended but foreseen, as you would say, I'm stealing your words.
No.
But foreseen result is that the child, like for instance, where the embryo implants in the fallopian tube, if I'm saying all that right.
Ectopic pregnancy.
Yeah, if that, we're not we're performing an abortion when we're saving the life of the mother in that situation. That's not
correct.
an abortion.
That's correct.
As you define it, right?
Yeah, let's go back to our syllogism, and this is why whenever I teach a pro-life ethics course, I always start the course, graduate level or undergraduate level, does not matter. I say I'm going to give you the three most important words in pro-life ethics: syllogism, syllogism, syllogism. If you don't stick to your syllogism, people will change the subject, change the terms on you, switch the tags on you. So let's go back to our syllogism. Premise one, it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise two, abortion does that. And then conclusion, therefore it's wrong. Now, notice that with that argument, I now am tethered to a formal case. So let's apply that now to a situation like the one you just brought up, ectopic pregnancy. This is where the embryo implants in the inner wall of the fallopian tube rather than the uterine wall. Now, our critics love to say, well, you would act to save the mother's life in that case, because after all, if you don't remove the pregnancy, as that embryo grows in that narrow tube, the mother's going to hemorrhage to death if that tube bursts. And they're right. It's a lethal threat to the mother's life. They're not wrong about that. And then our critics say, see, even you don't respect life in the womb because you would perform an abortion in that case. Well, wait a minute. Let's go back to defining our terms. We didn't say it was always wrong to end human life. We said it was always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. In this case, do we intend to intentionally kill an innocent human being? No. If we had a means of saving both mother and embryo, we would. So we act to save the one life we can in this case, which happens to be the mother. And I could also argue, by the way, if someone is still troubled by this, that by removing the embryo, who is already in a lethal environment where he will die, he's going to die in there. The only question is, will the mother die too? But he's going to die in there. By removing him, I have not made him worse off. He will die in the tube, he will die outside, but in the process, I have saved the mother. I have achieved an objective moral good. Now, for those who would say, well, that sounds like relativism. No, relativism is do whatever you want. There are no moral rules. The greatest objective good I can do in this case is save the one life I can, but that's not abortion. And my syllogism saves me from being labeled inconsistent.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. So let's say now, because I'm sure everyone in this audience has been hit with a question along the lines of why aren't pro-lifers pro-life in every area or something like that. So for the layman like me, I'm in the coffee shop with a friend and they throw something out like, you know, you're pro-life, but why don't you, you know, you're not really pro-life because you don't care about, you know, the border, or you don't care about, you know, pick your topic. What is something we can graciously engage that argument with, or that accusation with?
Yeah, there's three things we need to do. First is to look at the person and say, could you help me out here? I want to make sure I understand why you're asking the question. Are you asking the question because my alleged unwillingness to take on these other issues is preventing you from accepting the truth of the pro-life position? Is that why you're asking? Or is it that you're just throwing out an objection? And then the second thing I would ask is, how does my alleged unwillingness to adopt a child or take on the environment or take on poverty justify an abortionist intentionally killing an innocent human being? In other words, how does my alleged inconsistency justify the intentional killing of an innocent human being? Could abortion still be wrong even if I'm inconsistent? And the answer is, of course it could be. So notice they've attacked the person. They haven't refuted your argument. But the reason I asked that first question about ground rules, why are you asking this question, in other words, I want to know if they're being intellectually honest. So what I will say is, okay, my follow-up would be, okay, if I took on every issue you say that I'm responsible to take on, will you now become pro-life and oppose abortion? Oh no, women have a fundamental right to an abortion. Okay, time out. Why don't you defend that? If a woman has a fundamental right to an abortion, that means there can be no restrictions on it. It's fundamental, it's unabridged. That means abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason or no reason. Why don't you defend that position, make your case for that position, rather than simply attacking pro-lifers for allegedly being inconsistent? I'm going to call them out on it. And Then and only then will I point out, oh, by the way, you haven't done your homework. Number one, conservatives outgive liberals in charitable giving, and that's a known fact. Number two, pro-life pregnancy centers outnumber abortion clinics 2 to 1. Oh, while we're at it, if a woman goes to Planned Parenthood and says, I don't want an abortion, but I need you to help me with housing, clothing, and supporting my born children, will they do it? No, the only thing they will do is sell her an abortion. So you tell me, who's doing the better job being holistic in their pro-life effort?
Yeah. That's harder, though, for them to defend.
Yes, yes.
So I think you said it's, the smoke screen that they put up to really divert from the main thing.
Listen, Planned Parenthood, all pro-choice groups and individuals would rather talk about pro-lifers wanting to take away their condoms, pro-lifers not taking on every issue under the sun. They don't want to have to defend killing children. And in a sense, the pro-life movement has failed to make killing children the focus of our efforts. That's what needs to be the target zone. We force people to focus on what abortion is, the intentional killing of an innocent human being. And I think too many of us worry that we won't be appearing as nice if we do that. People won't like us. Can I tell you something? They're not going to like you anyway. Now, that's not a license to be rude or unduly harsh. I'm not saying that. But I think Greg Cunningham puts it well. He says, liked social reformers are seldom effective, and effective social reformers are seldom liked.
Yeah.
There is a part of this, just like in gospel proclamation. You can't get around talking about hell. You can't get around talking about our own sinfulness. In the same way, with abortion, you can't get around talking what the act actually entails, the intentional dismemberment of a human being. And we've got to be willing to be truthful, be gracious about it, but we got to be truthful.
Yeah. So many directions to go. I would love for you to talk a little bit, and I don't think you touched on this, but again, applying it to the context of, us around the water cooler at work or at the coffee shop with a friend. Give me the 60-second version of trotting out the toddler.
Yeah. Trot out the toddler is a tactic we use to show people that the status of the unborn is the issue, not privacy, not choice, not trusting women, not economic hardship, none of the things people bring up like forcing morality or any of those things. So think about the typical pro-choice objection to the pro-life view. Well, why don't you trust women to make their own personal decisions? All right, stop right there. What does that assume about the unborn? Well, it assumes they're not human, because would anybody argue we should have the right to kill toddlers in the name of trusting parents to make their own personal decisions? Never. They only argue that way with the unborn because they assume the unborn are not human. They haven't argued for it, they're just assuming it. So we want to flush that assumption out into the open, and the way we do that is every time we hear someone make an argument or make an assertion, more accurately, for why abortion ought to be allowed, we should ask ourselves, is this a good argument for killing a toddler? If the answer is no, the critic is assuming the unborn aren't human. So trot out the toddler works like this. Suppose that we're talking and I say to you, well, Adrian, what's your problem? Don't you respect a woman's right to privacy? You're not going to panic. You're not going to say, well, I do. I support women having privacy. And no. First words out of your mouth. You're going to hold your hand out at knee level and you're going to say, Scott, pretend I have a 2-year-old in front of me, and pretend that his parents want to rough him up in the privacy of the bedroom. Should they be allowed to do it? Well, I'm going to say, no, well, of course not. And you're going to say, well, why not? Well, because he's a human being. And you're going to reply with one word said musically, ah. Now, when I sing, things die, but you might get a better,
yeah.
Ah. If the unborn are human, like that toddler, should we intentionally dismember the unborn in the name of privacy any more than we do that for a toddler? Well, that's different, I might say. The unborn aren't human, the toddler is. And you would reply, ah, you could be right, Scott. It's possible my argument for the humanity of the unborn is wrong, but I need you to show me it's wrong, not simply assume the unborn aren't human. In other words, you're establishing ground rules with trot out the toddler. You're not arguing that the unborn are human like the toddler. You use science to do that. Rather, you're arguing that that's the question we need to resolve. are the unborn human. Because what your critic is doing is what we call begging the question. Now, begging the question doesn't mean raising the question.
Right.
A lot of people misuse that term. Yeah. Begging the question is assuming what you're trying to prove. Like me saying to you, Adrian, when did you start cheating on your taxes? And you say, I don't. Well, that's not what I asked you. Right. When did you start? Well, I would be assuming the very thing I was trying to prove. I'd be begging the question by making that question to you. Our critics are assuming the unborn aren't human. They haven't argued for it, they're simply assuming it.
I observe that most of the time that is what happens.
Yes.
And most of the argument on both sides, to the pro-lifer's shame, but most of the argumentation is about other things other than the main thing.
That's right.
Right? And trotting out the toddler gets us back to the main thing.
It does.
What is it?
Yeah, what is it? And you brought up bad arguments, and let's be honest here, pro-lifers make some bad arguments too. Mm-hmm. So let me give you one. You're talking to somebody and you say, boy, think how bad it would have been if Beethoven's mother would have aborted him. Or they say something like this, we probably would already have the cure for cancer had we not aborted the doctor who would have eventually cured it. Okay, these are horrific arguments. Mm-hmm. The pro-life argument is not that abortion is wrong because it kills a gifted individual. Mm-hmm. Our argument is that it's wrong because it intentionally kills an innocent human being, whether he's gifted or not, regardless of his functional abilities. So as pro-lifers, we want to make good arguments, not bad arguments. And the Beethoven argument, the doctor who cures cancer argument, these are not good arguments. We don't want to make them.
Yep. Another thing that you mentioned was the need for us as Christians, for us as involved in the pro-life work, to be good apologists.
Yes.
What does that look like, and what opportunities are we not taking?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I'm so glad you asked, what does a good apologist look like? Because there are apologists out there, and by the way, we are all capable of drifting into this, where we view ourselves kind of like an old Western gunfighter, where our job is to just mow people down and show them their arguments are garbage. That is not the biblical view. I think the biblical view is to be persuasive and gracious, and we're artful in our methods. So let me give you an example of how this might play out. We live right now in a culture that's obsessed with equality. And for a lot of us as Christians, we look at that and go, that's just horrific. I mean, people are abusing what equality should mean. And yes, they are. But what if we could use their fundamental understanding of equality to make a case for the pro-life view? So here's a great conversation starter with someone. You know they want equality in all cases. They want to be able to marry whoever they want. They want to be able to have income equality, social equality, you name it. So I would look at somebody and say, tell me, do you believe that each and every human being has equal fundamental rights? Who is going to say no to that question?
Right.
And the answer is nobody's going to say no. I then say, if I can demonstrate to you that the unborn are human beings, do you agree that they too deserve the same fundamental rights as you and I? Now, one of two things is going to happen right there. The intellectually honest person will say, yeah, I guess I would agree. More than likely, the backpedaling will begin.
Yeah.
Well, you know, every situation is different, and the unborn might be human, but they're not persons. Wait a minute, let me just back up a minute. And then we engage in what we call narrating the debate. And we need to be very careful here that we do this well so we don't come off as snarky. I would say to the person, listen, can I make an observation? And I'm not trying to be gotcha here, I'm just trying to get clear on where we're going. I had asked you a moment ago if you believed each and every human being has an equal right to life and has equal fundamental rights. You said yes. I then said, if I can demonstrate the unborn are human, do they deserve the same rights as everybody else? And I noticed that you didn't really address the question. You kind of pivoted over here. Do you mind if we go back to that question? And I'm going to pivot them back there to stay focused on the main thing. Keep the main thing the main thing.
Yeah, that's great. Last thing, I don't know of any, we've filmed together on college campuses, and you've talked to students on campuses, and I do not know of anyone who can take a conversation on the topic of abortion and pivot so well to a gospel proclamation as you do. Talk to me about the ripe harvest field that's sitting there when we're in a conversation on abortion, to be able to offer the great hope of a great Savior in the midst of talking about something so horrific.
Yeah, this is such an important question. See, a lot of Christians mistakenly believe that the only way you can get people to understand abortion is if they first understand the gospel. Hence, you get claims like, well, if you want to end abortion, you got to preach the gospel. It often goes the other way, though. Once they become convinced that objective truth is real, and moral truth in particular is objective and real, and that they've fallen short of it, that abortion is an affront to objective moral truth, you're right at the doorway of the gospel. You know, Greg Koukl is so good at this, the president at Stand to Reason. He says you can really ask just a couple of simple questions to get people to the threshold of the gospel, and abortion, more than any other topic I know, sets the table for this. You basically are asking them the question, do you think people who commit moral crimes deserve to be punished? Almost everybody says yes. You then say, have you committed moral crimes? Again, everybody, yeah. Does that mean then that you, like me, deserve to be punished? I guess so. We are now at the threshold of the gospel. Mm-hmm. Abortion is such a great issue for making sin real in concrete terms. Mm-hmm. So often we talk about sin abstractly. And in a relativistic culture, I think that can miss the mark. Mm-hmm. One of the things we need to do is help reawaken people's moral intuitions so that they begin to see evil for what it is. And think of it this way, every voice they hear in the culture is telling them that wrong, sin, evil doesn't exist. All we have are personal perspectives. That's the whole postmodern worldview we're in. But when you show pictures of abortion, when you make abortion real to people, now sin is concrete, and you reawaken in them their need for repentance. And it's a wonderful doorway to take them from this is really, really bad to I know just the person that can deal with this.
Yeah.
And we're not being wishy-washy, we're not being soft on sin, we're actually being very truthful about sin to set their need for the Savior. People who don't feel their sinfulness don't need a gospel. Yeah. They don't want it. Why should I mean, if you say to me, hey, I got a pill here that is going to really, Scott, I'm telling you, this pill is going to turn your skin so pretty, I really don't care what my skin looks like.
Right.
At age 61, it's kind of like, is there anything that's going to be done to fix this mug? No, nothing, you know? But if you say to me, Scott, unbeknownst to you, you and I have been breathing air laced with a lethal dose of a gas that's going to kill you if you don't take action and take this pill that I have right now. You have exactly 30 seconds to take it or it'll be too late. I'm going to be yanking that thing out of your hand and taking it because I see the need for it. And we can use abortion to point people to their need for Jesus. We don't spare them guilt when we don't talk about it. We spare them healing.
Yes. Amen. Well, that's excellent. Now, if people were to right now go over to your booth and the Gospel Life Rally, go over to LTI's booth, Life Training Institute, you're the president, what can they find there for free?
Well, first of all, they will find an article I've written there called What Does It Mean to Be Pro-Life? And it will cover a lot of the topics you and I just talked about. But secondly, those of you watching right now, I'm going to throw in an extra for you just because I like your people. And I'll do a Trump here. I really like you people. You're marvelous. You're wonderful, all of you. Greatest people ever. I am going to include there a summary of the pro-life argument, both the scientific aspects of it, the philosophic, and that syllogism that we talked about. So if you want to get really, really smart,
yes,
they can go there
exactly.
and get that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
You bet.
I appreciate you, appreciate this, appreciate your work with LTI. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.